Welcome to High Off Blue Hour. This video is going to be aimed at those that either already own a Panasonic Lumix G7 or maybe you're thinking about buying one and you're wondering what lenses you should get. Now, I've owned a Lumix G7 for a while now and I've accumulated a few lenses, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I think of these lenses and whether or not I'd recommend them to other current and future Lumix G7 owners. Now, the first lens we'll take a look at is the kit lens that came with the camera when I bought it. This is the Lumix G Vario 14 to 42 mm f3.5 to 5.6 with mega optical image stabilization. This lens will do for when you very first get the camera, but that's pretty much because it came with the camera. Now, if you happen to purchase a G7 body only, then ignore this lens altogether. Its low light performance is lackluster and it leaves a lot to be desired in terms of sharpness. Now, my biggest positive about this lens is that it's actually the widest angle G7 lens I own. Unfortunately, its images are the worst quality of the G7 lenses I own as well. So really only use this lens if it came with your camera and it's all you have. Now, the next lens I purchased was a much needed upgrade, and that was the Lumix G 25mm f1.7 prime lens. So this is 25mm, and of course the Lumix G7 is a micro four thirds camera, so the 25mm is roughly the equivalent to 50mm on a full frame camera. This lens is great for portraits and macro shots, but it's also workable for landscape stuff as well. And this is basically the default lens I use with the G7. I use this lens for a lot of nighttime long exposure shots, just, really taking advantage of its great low light performance. I'd for sure recommend this lens to any G7 owner with a kit lens who wants to upgrade, and just overall I think this is a must-have lens for any G7 owner to have in their arsenal. So after the 25mm, the next lens I purchased was the Lumix G Vario 45 to 150mm f4.0 to 5.6 mega optical image stabilization. This telephoto lens is best for daytime shots where you have a subject at a distance and you want a closer shot without actually physically getting closer to your subject. At f4.0, this isn't a good low light lens and the overall image it produces is on the softer side. Now, with that being said, you can get some nice nighttime shots with this lens. It's just not the optimal lens for it. And if you try to shoot nighttime stuff long enough with this lens, you'll eventually get to a point where you wish you had a lens with better low light performance. So keep that in mind. I don't, dislike this lens, but I'm not exactly crazy about it either. The only way I would really recommend this lens is if you're basically mainly a daytime shooter and you want a zoom telephoto lens and you don't mind a softer image. This next lens, I got this lens as a bit of an experiment. This is the Rokinon 85mm t1.5 full frame cine lens. So this is a full frame 85mm manual focus prime cinema lens that has an adapter mounted to it that allows it to be used with micro four third camera systems. So what attracted me to this lens was the fact that it was 85mm and its aperture at t1.5 lets in a lot of light. And the lens was a nice price considering its good quality. So I was eager to try some night shots with this one. I also knew I was taking a bit of an unorthodox route, as this is a cinema lens that I purchased with intent to shoot photos with. So I was already kind of swimming against the current, so to speak. So some key points about this lens. This is a very soft lens. Stylistically, this can actually be a good thing as its images often have a soft, old school cinematic look to them, like a film from the 70s or the 80s. But if you're looking for that modern, razor sharp, crisp look, I don't think this is a good lens for that. Now the Rokinon does produce some great bokeh and background separation and is a real powerhouse when it comes to cinematic low light performance. Now something else worth pointing out is the weight. The Rokinon 85mm is a considerably heavier lens than the other lenses. The lens is actually heavier than the Lumix G7 itself. It's a very noticeable weight and balance difference when you swap out one of the regular micro four thirds lenses for this one. This will make your G7 very front heavy and likely cause your tripod to tip over if it's not made or rigged to handle heavier weights. This is a manual focus only lens with a declicked aperture control ring. Both the focus ring and the aperture ring have gearing on the side that allows for using a follow focus attachment. So some really smooth focus pulls are possible with this camera, which adds to the old school cinema look the lens can give off. Now, due to the camera's impractical mixture of being a manual focus only lens while also being 85mm and awkwardly large, I just never got into using it long term. And I ended up finally purchasing a lens that could give me basically an equivalent to the 85mm range and the fast aperture, while also having autofocus capabilities, a sharper image, and a much lighter weight. And that brings me to the final lens of the video, the Lumix G 42.5mm f1.7 prime lens with power optical image stabilization. This lens hit all the markers that I needed it to hit. Its 42.5mm mid telephoto focal distance allows for that same background separation that I praised the Rokinon for. Again, keeping in mind that the 42.5mm micro four thirds is roughly the equivalent to an 85mm full frame. And just from a comfort perspective, at the time it was kind of a relief to go from using the Rokinon to using the Lumix 42.5. So in the end, out of just these 5 lenses that I own for the Lumix G7, there's 2 that I would absolutely recommend with no hesitation, obviously based on my needs and what I'm looking to do, and that is the Lumix G 25mm f1.7 prime and the Lumix G 42.5mm, which is also an f1.7 prime. The other lenses all have their uses depending on what you're trying to do, particularly the Rokinon, which is a quality lens for the price, and I have not used it admittedly under the most ideal circumstances or for the most ideal purposes. It's worth a look if you're on a budget and you want a cinema lens that you intend to use like a cinema lens, which, like I said, I didn't really do. As it stands now, the only other type of lens I'm looking to get for the G7 is a wide prime lens. At that point, I'd pretty much have everything I need covered as far as the G7 is concerned. So that is the video, you guys. Links down below for all the lenses in this video if that happens to interest you. And obviously, maybe it goes without saying, but these were just the lenses that I've purchased for the G7. There's lots of other lenses out there as options, so obviously shop around to find what works for you. So that's the video, you guys. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you on the next one.